Thank you all for showing up. Um, like I said, I'm Matt Rinker. I work for the Arizona Game and Fish Department here in our Flagstaff office. This is part two of a two-part series. My counterpart, Colby Walton, gave a talk last week on hunting for a healthy lifestyle. Today, we're talking about fishing. So dive right in. A little bit about me. I grew up in the White Mountains of Arizona. Started working for the department in 2000 as a summer intern, and then got hired on full time in 2003. I'm an Arizona native, grew up over there, and then went to the big city here in Flagstaff at NAU and graduated with a bachelor's in biology and fish and wildlife management. My dad was a wildlife manager for the game fish department also, and that really influenced who I became. I love to hunt, I love to fish, and I love the outdoors. So happy to share some of what I've learned along the way with y'all. My job, I'm an aquatic wildlife specialist. Specifically, I work in sportfish. So my job is to work with the hatchery programs to put fish out on the landscape, get to do a few neat surveys along the way, monitor our reservoirs and water, see how fish populations are doing. Have to write a few reports here and there along the way. I do produce a weekly fishing report, and I'll give my email at the end if y'all would like to be a part of that. You just shoot me an email, I'll add you to my listserv, and you'll get it every week. It's a good way to know what's fishing where we've stocked recently, if we're having any water qualities, openings, closures, things like that. So it's a good resource. Obviously, I'm biased at writing, right? So let's see. Do work with regulation changes as needed, and then big part of my job is working with the anglers of the state. So I'm there as a resource for the folks that fish, to help them have a good time while they're out there. Yeah, I work for you guys. So in general, I'm here to manage the 36 fisheries that are in Region 2. Talking about Region 2, the state is split up into 6 regions, game and fish regions. I work in this one here at Flagstaff, right? So kind of this northwest corner of the state, all the waters within there are my responsibility. There's a quick list of the fisheries that I manage. You can see the majority of them are kind of centralized around Flagstaff and the Williams area, although we do have a few waters down Verde Valley, Oak Creek, West Clear Creek, Wet Beaver Creek, and then Lake Powell, Lee's Ferry, and northwest corner of the state. There's none of that, but the Virgin River up there is about as far north and west as we go. So today's talk, these are the things I'd like to cover with y'all. Some of the health benefits of fishing. Looking at the cost of fishing, is it expensive? Go over a lot of the gear, some of the things you might think about to get started. Talk about seasonal water quality and how that affects fish behavior, and understanding that will really help you catch more fish here in the north part of the state. And of course, it's fishing for a healthy lifestyle, right? So we can't have to talk about a few good recipes, and then a question and answer at the end. So hopefully you have a good time. Before we get started, I kind of want to talk about how the department functions though. The Arizona Game and Fish Department its whole model is based on this idea of the North American model. And what that is, it's basically the land, public land, and the animals that live in that public land are all property of the people of the country and people of the state. So it belongs to us all, right? It's the user pay, user play kind of an idea. This is different than like a European model where the rich people, the lords, were the ones that own the land and own the wildlife, and the commoners didn't get to hunt or fish. That's terrible, right? That's why it's you live here, not there. More specifically, how money comes in are through things like excise taxes on boating, fishing, and hunting gear, and those are the Dingell-Johnson Act. That's our fishing equipment. The Wallet-Burrell Act, that's our boating and boating fuel tax. And then the Pittman-Robertson Act is on shooting sports, guns, and ammo. And so that's nationwide, but each state gets an apportionment of that based on the percentage of use in that state. We do get money through the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. That's another big part of our income. And then big game tags, any hunting tags that we put out, that's income. One that is kind of a surprise is this Heritage Fund. We get a little bit of money through the lottery system, and that's a little bit of money from Arizona's lottery. That usually goes to native species recovery. And we don't get any general tax dollars, no general fund dollars. That's another common misconception, is your general taxes are not coming to us. So we really do work for the hunters, boaters, and anglers in the state. So some of the health benefits of fishing, the obvious are consuming the fish, right? So they're high in protein, low in saturated fats, lots of great vitamins you can get from them, lots of great minerals. The omega-3 fatty acid is probably the most commonly known one, right? That helps you reduce your heart disease. Those are the obvious ones. Eating fish, if you cook them the right way. Some of those recipes are not the right way. But it can help you live a healthier lifestyle. Some of the lesser known health benefits are on the mental side, right? So there's tons of studies on the benefits of spending time in the outdoors and green spaces next to water can help your mental health. I think the biggest surprise for me was how it influences children. Exposure to the outdoors reduce risk of psychiatric disorders later in life. So it's a cumulative thing. It also helps them develop as they're going cognitive development, and then promoting things like self-control, are all derived from spending time outside. And then the obvious ones for adults, right? You feel that ease when you're out there, right? And fishing's a way to get you out in that type of environment. You put your screen down, you're not worried about work, right? You're in this beautiful place. This was an evening just last year, fishing Lower Lake Mary, catching a bunch of big trout, and then just caught right as the sun went down. Beautiful sunset. So who wouldn't want to go spend a little time doing that, right? So the big question that I get a lot is fishing expensive? Well, like any hobby, it is as expensive as you want to make it, right? Our intern here from a few years ago, she found this stick. She had some fishing line and tied a little fly on there, and look at that. She's catching trout in the stream. That did not cost her very much. So it doesn't have to be expensive to be successful, especially in the waters around here. We have a lot of great opportunities that you can do on the cheap and be successful. So cost of a fishing license for a resident is $37. And all of these licenses are valid for 365 days from the day of purchase. So it's not a calendar year anymore. So if you bought your license today, March 28th, it'd be valid till March 27th, 2026. The kids get a great deal here. If you're 10 to 17, it's only $5, and that's still that 365 from day of purchase. If you're under 10, you can fish for free. We don't charge kids under 10 to fish. So we dig on our non-residents a little bit more, but hey, they're driving all the way out here to fish, and they're using the state's research and state fails. So this is just kind of a description of what it costs the department to raise each of these species and how many fish you would have to catch to recoup your $37 of your license. So to put it in perspective, to raise a trout or to purchase a trout, the department spends about $5 a pound. Our average trout's roughly half a pound. So you go out a couple times, you get your 7 trout, you pay for your license and fish, right? Fillets. So bluegill a little bit more, they're $16 a pound. And a good bluegill is about a quarter of a pound. So you're looking at about 9 1/4 bluegill. Largemouth bass, this is surprising. This just keeps going up and up. They cost us $25 a pound. That's a fish and a half at a half-pound bass. That's a very popular sport fish. So the private hatcheries that grow, they know that, and they're charging this big time. And then catfish, that's a common one we get. They're only $4.50 a pound. Catch your four catfish at 2 pounds each, and you pay for your license. So put that into perspective. The cost of a fishing license really isn't that expensive. So the next question you ask yourself, how many fish can I keep? So this is from our general statewide regulations, cut right from the book. you know, trout, you can keep 4 trout a day. These are our daily bag limits. Those are the number of fish you can keep within a 24 hour period. And then the possession limit is typically twice the bag limit. But I do want to point out some of these species, there's no limit. You can keep as many as you want. Things like pike and crappie, some of the sunfish, yellow perch, yellow bass, all of those can be caught in the lakes up here. The only deviation from that is in the regulations, which I forgot, shame on me. We talked about it and I forgot it. It's separated by area. So this is region 2 here. If that water is listed in this list, it has some kind of deviation from the main regulations here. And those are listed on the side. So they may be limited, like Cataract Lake, you can only keep 2 bass. They have to be at least 13 inches. And the limit's 4 channel catfish instead of 10. So you have to pay attention. Good idea is to go grab your fishing regulations before you go out. But it doesn't take very long fishing to keep a few fish and recoup the cost of your license. That's the point about that. So we'll dive into gear a little bit. Is it gear expensive? It doesn't have to be. It's like any other sport, right? You can spend a bunch of money on a bunch of really nice golf clubs and go out and you're still terrible at golf, right? So I grew up, my first rod was my first fly rod was a $20 rod from Walmart, just a broomstick. It's a terrible fly rod, but I caught so many fish on that thing. And it's more about spending the time to learn how and using the right bait, right? So there's a lot of great options and places to find inexpensive gear. These are some of the local ones we have, you know, Walmart, Sportsman's Warehouse, Cal Ranch are all good places to look for deals. Secondhand stores, we have a few of those in town. Places like pawn shops sometimes have cheap rod reel combos that are nice. There's a lot of online deals. The bargain cave at Cabela's Bass Pro, sometimes you find some good deals there. And then yard sales, believe it or not, people are getting rid of, you know, the angler in the family moves or passes away or whatever, and people don't know how much that stuff's worth. That's a great place to pick up some cheap rods, some cheap gear. So when fishing with bait's probably the cheapest option. You know, Hannah, weather stick, stream side, you know, a can of corn is what, like maybe $1, a little hook, you know, and a line and a stick, and you're fishing. That's really all you need. The cost of fuel, honestly, is the most expensive expense for folks that are going fishing. But we have a lot of great local options, a lot of great places that are real close to fish. You don't have to drive halfway across the state to get out there. Diving into rods and reels a little more, I kind of separated in, we have 4 main categories here. This is probably the one a lot of folks that have fished are familiar with, the old push button Zebco style. So many of us, that was our first type of rod. These, you can find a lot of good combos for pretty cheap. That Zebco 202, Zebco 303, those are great rods to get somebody started. The bait casting rod, these are kind of tough. I'm not a huge fan of these for beginners. They have a tendency to bird's nest, cause knots, and they're not easy to fish, right? I grew up fishing an open face rod like this, rod and reel, the spinning rod. And then the old fly rod, right? That's probably the most expensive, but they don't have to be. Like I said, I grew up fishing a $20 one from Walmart, caught a bunch of fish. So some general prices that I found that you can get into these different types of setups pretty cheap. Of course, the most expensive is the fly rod. But honestly, if you want to get into fly fishing with a fly rod, don't spend money on the rod and reel, or spend money on the fly line. That's really what's the most important to be successful fly fishing. Let's see. Oh, take 3. There we go. So diving into rods a little more, the great thing about the manufacturers is every rod will have information on it on its specs. So we have here rod action. This is how easily and how far from the tip of the rod's going to bend. So your extra fast is right at the end of the rod and on down. And then the rod power is how much pressure it takes to bend the rod. So For a beginner, I tell folks, look at a fast or an extra fast action with a medium to medium heavy action rod. And what that's going to do is that'll let you fish in most scenarios, right? You're not going to be landing sturgeon with it. Obviously, great big fish, you have to be a little heavier, but it'll get you started if you want to just fish one rod all the time. That's what I recommend. The other nice thing about the rods is it tells you the weight of fishing line to use on that rod and reel. So like this example, that's 10 to 20 pound. And then sometimes I'll even have ratings for lure weight. So that's 1/4 ounce to 1 ounce lure. So the manufacturers really kind of help take the guesswork out of when you're buying gear, which is awesome. Hooks, again, all of this stuff can go down the rabbit hole and be daunting, right? There's so many different tackle options out there, all these different hook types, and this isn't even everything. Really up here, I'm kind of living with this bait holder, a circle hook, a treble hook, or maybe sometimes an octopus hook. Just those four, I'm fishing 90% of the time when I'm fishing hooks. And the nice thing about like the circle hook, the hooks fish kind of hook themselves. You don't even have to set the hook. They're really nice. Talking hook sizes, it's counterintuitive. So the smaller the hook is, the bigger the number is. So this tiny little hook is a number 20, and this one way over here is a number 1. Until we get to really big hooks, and then it switches. And so a 1/0 or this aught system is the smallest, and then a 9/0 is huge. So around here, I'm kind of fishing in this 8 to maybe 16, 18 if I'm fishing flies, but that's kind of where I'm living here in and around Flagstaff for the fish year, with the exception of fishing things like maybe catfish or pike. I might get into the 1/0 or 2/0, just have a bigger, meatier hook. Again, weights, there's all different kinds of crazy looking weights, right? I've separated out some of the more common ones here. Their sizing is similar. The smaller ones have the bigger number, which is counterintuitive. These are egg sinkers. They're very similar to this bullet sinker. They have a hole through the center of them that the line can go through. These are really great for some of the bait setups. I'll go over those in a few slides. These bell sinkers are great for like a drop shot kind of setup. And then split shots, you can crimp right on your line. These are even used sometimes in fly fishing, these smallest sizes here. So pretty universal. The only downside of split shot is they can abrade your line because they're pinching it right on. You're damaging your line a little bit, so you might have a little bit weaker line. But all of these, I'm kind of living in this 1/2 ounce or smaller size, and then this number 5 or lower for the split shot. Swivels, these are kind of the 4 main types that I've used. I've never used this finesse type. That's a new one to me, honestly. I learned something putting this talk together. But they have different uses. The barrel swivel here used to tie 2 pieces of line together. So this section would go up to your fishing rod, and then this down to your hook or to a weight, and then a hook. What it does is it allows you to fish a lighter line or a heavier line, or allows for a stop if you have like one of those barrel swivels, or not a barrel swivel, egg sinker. It stops it from sliding all the way down your hook. These ball bearing swivels prevent line twists, so this part swivels independently of the rest of it. So as your line's spinning through the water, it's not twisting your line up. That's really nice for fishing lures. Snap swivel is a good bet if you are looking to change your bait often. They just pop open this little clasp here, it unhinges. And so if I'm fishing lures and I'm not sure what's going to work, sometimes I'll tie a snap swivel on, and I can change my lures really quickly until I find what's working. And then this 3-way is a common bait fishing setup. This bottom one, we go down to like a weight, like a drop shot type setup. This up to your rod, and then this comes off with a hook and bait. But there's a lot of versatility here. They come in a whole bunch of different sizes. Again, it matches kind of the hooks here, smaller Smaller ones have a bigger number. Up to a certain point, we get into the same aught system, and then they get bigger with bigger aught. So 1 aught, 2 aught, 3 aught, 4 aught. So here are some common setups that you might use locally. One of the most common is this Carolina rig, right? So we have our barrel swivel in the middle, and then a length of line down to our hook where we'll put our bait. Bead is optional. Sometimes folks like a bead so that the end of the barrel swivel doesn't get caught up in the end of the bullet weight here. But this is a really common like catfishing rig, or if you can fish soft plastics for bass, this is a good setup. The drop shot is that bell sinker, and then up the line we tie in that fishing hook. That's where that 3-way swivel could be used. This is really good if you don't want your bait to sit right on the bottom, place with a lot of crayfish. You don't want crayfish messing with your bait. This is a good setup. If you're fishing out of a boat, like straight down, you can have direct tension on the line all the time and really detect subtle bites with this setup. It's in this setup. Fishing bobbers or floats. This is a common setup. You got your hook on the end, and then this weight or sinker. This can either be one that slides up and down, or can be one that crimps on the line. This bead and stopper depend on the style of float. This one has the line running through the center and it slides freely up and down the line, so you need something to stop it. Types of floats or bobbers clasp right to the line. We'll get into that in the slide here. And then some of the fly rigs. So these are different ways to add split shot to your flies. This is typically not used unless you're fishing a lot of current and you want to get your fly down. The lakes around here, this really isn't necessary. Anytime you add extra weight, you increase the chance of sinking a fly in the back of your head. So I'm not a big fan of putting weight on my flies, but you fish in, you go up to like Lee's Ferry, and those fish are out deep. Sometimes this is a common way to get set up so you can get your bait down where the fish are. So floats or bobbers, they kind of come in all shapes and sizes, right? And those shapes and sizes react differently in wind and in current. So these ones on the right, you're going to get the most drift. They're kind of more rounded, and sometimes that's desirable. If you're floating a bait down the stream, you might want it to drift down, right? But you're fishing the local lakes, you want your bait to stay in place. This end of the spectrum is probably where you're looking. I'm a big fan of these. I call them pencil bobbers because they're like the width of a pencil, right? But these are really nice for fishing the lakes around here. The line attaches to these in a bunch of different ways. This is probably the classic one everyone's seen, right? Has a hook on either end. The line gets clasped on either end there, and you can adjust it up and down as you release or tighten those clasps. These are great, but they have a lot of drift, right? A lot of resistance to blow your bait across the lake in a windy day. I like this style. That spring you can compress down, and there's like a hook inside, so the line kind of sets in the groove of the hook, wrap it around a couple times, let the spring go, and it stays stationary on the line. And then finally, this last type is like we saw in the diagram earlier, where you'll need the bead and the stop. The line runs freely through the bobber, but this will allow you to fish a bobber at really deep depth. So you can adjust that stop to 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. And still fish a bobber. That's a common way to fish for like crappie down in Roosevelt when the crappie are really deep. And the last one I threw in here, this is like the great equalizer for people that want to fish really small lures and fly fish without actually fly fishing. You don't have to have a fly rod to use this. It's a piece of surgical tubing. You can run the line right through the center of this thing. You twist this little end a bunch of times and it grasps the line. And all of a sudden your spinning rod or your bait casting rod is a fly rod. You just run your line down, tie a fly on, and now you're fly fishing. The other nice thing about these, you can pull this out and fill this up with water and make it really heavy. So if you're trying to throw a really small lure, casting, you're not getting further than 10 feet out. Fill this thing up with water and you can cast way out there. So I'm a big fan of these, especially in the wind, or if you're like I said, looking to fish flies or lures with conventional. Get into lures. These are kind of some of the generic categories, right? I've listed below some of my favorites locally here and the sizes I like to run. This inline spinner is a really good one. You know, Joe's flies, these have become really popular. I discovered these when they were a brand new company and they were like just a little over $1 a piece. And man, they catch the snot out of fish and now they're $4 a piece. The company has become very popular, unfortunately. Some of the more conventional ones, Panther Martins, Rooster Tails, right? Mep spinners, those are all good choices too. But they all have this blade idea that there's a lot of flash and vibration as you pull it through the water. Crankbaits, like seen here, come in kind of two different styles. They come either with or without this lip. So lipless crankbait will have the line tie kind of in the center of the bait. And these are designed to imitate mostly bait fish, but sometimes things like crayfish. The size and angle of this bill will determine how wide it wobbles and how deep it'll dive down into the water. And so the nice thing when you buy one of these, you take it pretty lure on the front, flip it over, the backside will tell you all the specs on how deep the lure will dive, and what line to use and all of that. So it's a pretty versatile lure. And again, in general, I just said, you know, we have a lot of crayfish up here, so crayfish patterns, any shiny patterns up here that mimic fish work pretty well. Spoons are another common one. I'm a big fan of the Castmasters, honestly, and then the Daredevils, but all of these are pretty good ones up here. Caught fish in all of these. But you notice on the inline spinner and the spoons, I'm fishing pretty small. A 12-ounce lure isn't very big. Up to a 1/4 ounce, that's really not very big. And I think folks are unsuccessful because they're throwing this giant stuff for these tiny fish. So if you're into catching fish, throw smaller stuff. Soft plastics can work really well up here. Curly-tailed grub. These micro jigs are just teeny tiny soft plastics, and they will look like larval fish and insects. And these work really well up here. And then classic soft plastics like worms and crayfish work really well too. So the surface lures. This is a popper. They are kind of a situational bait. You know, 90% of the time fish are feeding below the surface. So when you get a surface bite, it's kind of a rare thing, but it's nice to have a few lures in your arsenal to try to catch them on the surface because it's a lot of fun. But my main ones are these two, spinnerbait and buzzbait, because yes, you can fish them on the surface, but you can also let them sink and fish them subsurface. So they're more of a universal, quote unquote, surface lure. But things like frogs and grasshoppers work pretty well up here too. Grasshoppers in particular, we had a great grasshopper hatch last year, and so hopper patterns work really well. And this last one, the jig, they can come with or without like a bucktail or skirt or this extra stuff, or it might just be the head with the hook. These are oftentimes fished with something else like a soft plastic or piece of bait, a night crawler. A marabou jig is another common one. There's some applications there when fish are down deep or you want to fish slow. So flies, we're kind of living in 3 different types of flies here. The dry fly, the wet fly, and the nymph. Dry flies are pretty self-explanatory. Those are mimic the adult stage of insects. They're going to be on the surface. Your wet flies are that insect emerging. They're about to emerge. They're just below the surface. And then your nymphs are your larval or juvenile stage of insects. Up here, I really only fish like 5 fly patterns. That's it. And I catch like 99% of my fish on just a few handful of flies. So fly fishing is a hobby that you can get lost in. There's so many different options and things that it's easy to get overwhelmed. But really, these are kind of my favorite of the 3 different types of flies. We'll see some repeats of the lures, right? The hopper, right? These just below the surface ones. These are some good patterns. And then the nymphs, this is where I catch most of my fish. When you're down below the surface, you're pretty deep in the water. So if I was gonna pick like just a few flies, I would fish a semi-seal leech, a prince nymph, a zebra midge, and maybe a pheasant tail, and my dry fly would be a hopper. That's it. That's what would be in my box most of the time. And then sizes, my fly sizes, I'm fishing 18s to 10s most of the time. I don't get down into the crazy 22s and stuff because we don't have tiny insects like some of the rivers, like the San Juan, that's known for fishing teeny tiny flies. Don't need to here. You can throw big ugly stuff, which is awesome. I'm going to get into line on the next slide, but this is kind of a chart of fly fishing tippet, and all that is, that's the fishing line that goes from the fly line down to your fly. Its sizing system's a little different than main fishing line. They go by this X system, and they have a little ratio here of your hook size divided by 3 is how much size tippet you should use. I don't know. I don't know how important that is. But the bigger the number, the lighter the line. So the 2X is a heavier line, 6X is a finer line. The difference between normal fishing line and tippet is that a tippet is tapered. So it's going to be thickest at that connection with the fly line and then narrow down, and that allows you to lay your fly out nicely. Tends to cost a little more than main normal monofilament fishing line, and you don't have to use it in the lakes up here because presentation isn't as important as if you're fishing like a river or stream. So it's a way to save money. Don't buy tippet if you're going to fish a lake. You don't need it. This chart kind of separates the 3 different types of fishing line here. I'm living in the monofilament world most of the time. It's the cheapest, it's the easiest to cast, it's pretty strong when you tie a knot, and it has pretty good abrasion resistance. So the only time I deviate from this is if I'm going to fish something crazy like northern pike and I don't want the line to break. I might go to braid. And it's incredibly strong, right? But it's hard to tie knots on this thing. And it's easy to get tangles with braid. I'm not a big braid fan. Fluorocarbon, I only use if I'm fishing like really clear water or fish that are incredibly finicky. So the advantage of the fluorocarbon is its visibility is very low, right? Fish have a very hard time seeing it. So that's the advantage there. And oftentimes what I'll do is my spool of line is mostly monofilament, and then I will put a barrel swivel on and just add a liter of this fluorocarbon so the fish can't see that last little bit. And then I've got a little blurb. I tend to change my line once a year. What I'm looking for is you can feel the line, you'll feel the nicks and abrasions. That's kind of a cue that it's time to change. Or if you unspool it, it stays in a coil. That means it's starting to get this memory. That's what the memory on the bottom. It starts to take on the shape of what it's wrapped around. You know, hard time casting, start getting knots with that. But throughout the fishing season, you can replace little sections as you feel abrasions, but the whole thing once. So this is kind of just break down the weight of line that I like to use by species. So my trout and panfish can fish in this 4 to 8 pound. Catfish and bass, 6 to 14. Most of my rods are loaded up with 6. And what that does is it lets me catch trout and panfish no problem. But if I hook into like a catfish or a bass, I still have enough. Maybe I'll land it if my drag's set right. Some guys like to, or some folks like to go up to 8 pound. They can still catch trout and still land that big fish. If I start going for things like walleye and pike that are big and or have sharp teeth and gill rakers, you're looking at this heavier line, and oftentimes I'm fishing with a steel leader, just because they can break lines so easily with great big teeth, right? And again, that fluorocarbon for line shy fish or fishing in really clear water. This is a breakdown of the different types of fly lines. So this is the colorful part of the fly fishing line. It's not the monofilament, it's not our tip that goes down the fly, it's the weight that allows you to cast. They are separated by these different shapes in the line. So a traditional, just straight up fly line is just flat. There's no difference in diameter along the length of it. This double taper gets thin, then fat, then thin again. I'm a huge fan of this weight forward. What this does is this last little bit that's closest to where you tie off your line and your fly is heavier. And so when you start casting, it lets you shoot the line easier. This one and the shooting head are designed to help you cast easier. And that's a common mistake I see. You buy a cheap fly rod from like Walmart Cabela's. It's oftentimes this, which is the hardest to cast. It's like casting wet noodle. So I'll replace this stuff with a good weight forward line. And when earlier slide I said spend your money on a fly line, this is what I'm talking about. You buy that cheap Cabela's rod or that cheap Walmart rod, but swap it out for a decent. The good thing about all the fly fishing packages is it has this system that tells you what it is. So this is a WF is that weight forward, and then 4F, 4 is the weight of the rod. So again, we go back to that picture of the rod. Fly rods are in weights, and that corresponds to the weight of the fly line. So if I had a 4 weight fly rod, I would buy this 4 weight fly line, and then F just means floating. So they have floating, sinking tip, fast sink, and they have a bunch of different varieties of this sinking line. Up here, I just use floating line. They don't need to buy it. Yes.
So where does it go? Thick of the thin, thick, thin? Or
so the weight forward is just thin, 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 and then the last, how long is it? Last like 30 feet is thicker.
Okay.
So the hardest thing is like that first little bit getting it out. This helps you do that, and then when you're making those long casts, you have that extra weight to shoot out. And so the shooting line is the best at it, but it takes a little practice because it's so heavy. It's easy to hit yourself in the back of the head with the shooting line. But if you master shooting line, you can cast the farthest with it. But for a beginner, this weight forward is like a nice intermediary to long cast, but you're not fishing wet noodle. Knots, these are kind of the two main knots, right? There's a bunch of different knots out there. These are the two that I use all the time. This clinch knot, run the line through the eye of the hook, wrap it around the main line 5, 6, 7 times, and run it back through the main line. If you were to run this line back through this loop you made, that's an improved clinch. So that's another knot. Clinch, improved clinch. They're both pretty good. This polymer knot's another common one. Double up your line, go through the eye of the hook, and then you're going to make a loop, run it through it, and it creates this extra loop. You run your hook through that and cinch it down. That's pretty easy. Pretty easy knot. So if I was going to teach somebody 2 different knots, those would be the 2 to get started.
When would you use the paddle mark? Versus the system?
If I'm bait fishing, I kind of like the Palomar a little more. The fish tend to gnaw a little more close to the hook. This can come unraveled if the fish are really biting the line itself. If I'm fishing lures, I tend to use the clinch. I learned clinch first. So that's what's like embedded in my brain. I learned this one a little later. So yeah, fishing bait, I like the polymer. Lures are like the clinch, but there's a bunch of knots out there. You can drive yourself crazy Googling different fishing knots. Trying to keep it simple for this stuff. When we're fishing, a lot of people think what to fish for in terms of seasons. Problem with Northern Arizona is oftentimes their seasons don't follow the rules right. So I think the more important thing to think about is water quality. What's going on with the water, specifically temperature at any time of year. So this year is a great example. Things warmed up really quickly. So our typical spring fishing wasn't typical. We had things like largemouth bass being caught in early April, and typically that's not what happens. The water warmed up fast enough that we're active, and so I'm really more watching temperature than anything else. And the reason for that, we'll get a little bit into the science of lakes here. Spring and fall, we get this turnover, and all this is different temperature of water weighs differently. And so in the spring and the fall, coupled with wind action, we get a lot of mixing, and that creates a uniform temperature throughout the lake that allows fish to be anywhere they want. And so fishing is often the best in the spring and the fall because fish aren't limited by the water quality or water chemistry. We get into summer, this top layer is warm, and oftentimes it's too warm for species like trout. And so what they'll do is they'll dive down into this thermocline, this layer in the center. Water temperature is okay for them here. It's not so deep that there's not enough oxygen, and things like pH tend to be okay here where they might not be okay on the surface. So that's why it's hard to fish in the summertime, especially for trout, because they're living in this little band at 10, 15, 20 feet deep until things get better. And then in the winter, you kind of see this flip, right? Like your coldest water's on the top. You think about it, lakes freeze over, right? Your warmest water's on the bottom, but oftentimes this doesn't have any oxygen in it. So those fish aren't going to be down here. They're again going to be in this middle layer. We get into challenges like ice, right? It's hard to fish with ice. So winter can be a challenge in that respect. We look at the same kind of concept seasonally by species. This shows you that our trout species and our walleye, perch, and pike are the first species to get active. And so when I start fishing in spring, those are the species that I'm targeting first. We get into late spring, things start warming up a little bit, get into this magic kind of mid-50s, mid-60s range. That's when our bass, bluegill, catfish, crappie all start getting active. Most of those species spawn around 65. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that temperature change. When it gets high 60s, trout start becoming less active, and they're going to dive down to that thermocline layer. So
sure. Is
yes.
that water temperature or the air?
This is water temperature. Sorry, yeah. They're related, but not mutually exclusive. So summertime, this is what I'm targeting: bluegill, bass, crappie. You can still catch a few northern pike, walleye, and perch. And then fall's awesome. Things cool down and everything bites. We'll start with your bass, bluegill, crappie. They'll start slowing down like fall, and your trout will turn on. Trying to get fat for the winter. Winter time, those cold water species are active again. So that's kind of more of a on species level look at that temperature idea. So I'm fishing in the spring, like I said. I'm targeting trout first. Waiting for that water to hit that mid-50s, 50 to 60, and then we're going to see that shift from trout to some of those other species. Good thing about spring is fish really aren't limited by temperature. So a lot of times I'm catching fish real close into shore or at inflow areas. Inflows are important. If we get a good runoff, a lot of species will key in on that running water and try to spawn where streams are coming into the lake. So that's a good place to target. The downside of spring is we get a lot of runoff. The water is oftentimes dirty, and so you need to slow down. Fish are sight feeders, and so if you're throwing a lure and burning it real fast, they might not see it. So slow down in the spring. Look for shoreline and inflow areas, and that's my main approach in spring.
Did you take a thermometer with you?
I'm a nerd, yeah.
You like have a way to measure what the temperature is at different.
I also, that's a part of my profession is we take the water chemistry of the lakes that helps inform our stocking. So we do what you're describing as a profile. So we'll measure every meter, and we can see that change in temperature, oxygen, pH. But yeah, that kind of tells where the fish are. Just looking at the water quality. Yes.
The fishing report, can you see your notes about that?
Yeah, and the fishing report, I don't post whole lake profiles because it would take up too much space, but I will provide the surface temperature, pH, and oxygen. So we'll deviate from the talk a little bit. So the pH and oxygen, we tend to be on the basic side of this pH scale. So 7 is neutral, 14 super basic, 1 super acidic. We live in the 7 and up. the pH gets to 9.5, it starts stressing fish out, particularly trout. So that's something to look at. If my fishing report says the pH is 10, I wouldn't go fishing there because those fish are super stressed. Similarly, oxygen, fish can handle down to, depends on the species, 4 or 5 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. It gets below that, we start seeing fish die. So oxygen is a big component, especially during monsoon season. We get a lot of vegetative growth. Monsoons, clouds roll in, turn the lights off, and oxygen drop. Critters are still breathing, they're still using up oxygen, but there's no photosynthesis. And so we'll see an oxygen drop around monsoon season. So look for things like this, algae blooms, right? This is impacting this lake's pH level. And so if I was going to fish this lake, I wouldn't fish this shoreline where this is all getting blown to shore. It can, on a localized scale, have a way higher pH where the algae is versus the other side of the lake where it isn't. So those fish might all be stacked up on the opposing shoreline of the lake. Let's see. Yeah, look for structure, right? Some of your species are going to be down at depth at that thermocline, and slow down. Try fishing for things that are active like bluegill, bass, and catfish in the summer. Fall fishing, we get that mixing again. All of the species are hungry. I like targeting what we call fall spawners, those fish that like to fall in the fall, that spawn in the fall, like brown trout here. These guys will be cruising the shorelines of our lakes, trying to get fat, trying to find someone to breed with. It's a good time to catch big brown trout. Then winter is kind of a challenge. Trout fishing tends to be excellent from late fall into winter until the lakes freeze over. So I switch back to trout fishing in the winter. We do deal sometimes with dirty runoff and having to slow down because water is turbid or dirty. Ice fishing in northern Arizona really isn't a thing. It makes me really uncomfortable, and I'm from Arizona. I've been ice fishing one time in my life, way up at 9,500 feet, and the ice was a foot thick, and that's the only time I've done it. The problem with here is even though the ice might be safe in the morning, we get these great temperature swings throughout the day that by the afternoon it may be unsafe. And so if you read up on ice fishing, the most dangerous ice is this first ice. And we get thawed out and frozen so often that we're living in that first ice scenario most of the winter, most of the time. So with exception, some folks pull it off. I'm really uncomfortable with it. The department doesn't recommend or not recommend you do at your own risk kind of thing, but if you do, be incredibly careful and plan a way to get out, take a friend. There's a bunch of different tools and things to help pull you out. I don't know, it's scary to me. We've lost people in the state going through the ice, so this is scary to me. I don't like pushing them. I tend to my gear in the wintertime, tie my flies in the wintertime. So this wouldn't be a hunting and fishing for a healthy lifestyle without some recipes, right? I was heavy on the fishing side, not so much on the eating side. So there's some recipes, handouts in real time on the table there, but these are also some great online resources. A lot of our sister agencies, Arkansas, North Dakota, Texas, all have links to some good recipes on their web pages. Some good books. Hank Shaw has a couple great books out there. If you've seen the Meat Eater show, there's a few recipe books from them. And then Randy Babb was one of our biologists for the department. He's got this hunting Arizona small game, and part of that book, not only how to hunt small game, there's also some recipes. Quick Google search, you'll find a bunch of good stuff. And then last little blurb, I put out my weekly fishing report. My email is super easy. It's my first initial and my last name, Matt Rinker at AZGFD.gov. Just send me an email, say, hey, I want to be part of the fishing report, and I'll add you to my list. Some other good resources are websites, education link there. There's some good how-to fishing videos on that. And then our Fish and Boat AZ, that's an app that has all of the waters in the state, tell you what's in it, access, things like that. And then our local Facebook page also is a place to get my fishing report and some other interesting things that are happening locally. So that'll take any other questions y'all have.
Could we get a copy of the PowerPoint?
We can do that if you're up.
Yeah, I'm fine.
If you're okay with it. The other thing I'll do is, the Zoom meeting is recorded. Same with last week's presentation, so in about a week or two. I can get those up on our YouTube channel and I'll send the link out to all the participants.
Yeah, for sure.
Do any of these resources show how to clean the fish?
I want to think, do any of the videos go over that?
Cause there's catching and recipes, but the middle part.
That's a good oversight for a future thing, right? YouTube's awesome, I'll tell you that. If you're near the office and you have fish, if you want to stop by, we have biologists there that can help you out too. That was an oversight on my part. What a good question that I missed. Thank you. Yes,
For the kids' license, do they have to be an adult as well?
for if they're under 10, yes, they have to be with a licensed adult. So the kids that are free, if they're 10 to 17, they don't. They just have their youth license. They can fish without them.
So if you want to go fishing different and they all have the kids' license, then
Yeah, if you're 10 to 17 and you have it on you, you can go without mom or guardian.
I've been up at Lake Powell, gotten into, boils of fish. Are they eating at that time? I mean,
Yes,
sure
that's-
seems like it, but I
yes.
haven't had good luck catching it.
Yeah,
What am
so-
I doing wrong?
So that is, I'm gonna back up quite a few slides that I'm still got access.
Go ahead.
What they're eating are threadfin shad. That's the main food source up there. And so, oh, there it was. So I'm fishing this guy right here without the lip.
Okay,
This is a lipless crankbait, ties in the middle, buy them in, where's my crankbaits? Rattle traps, lipless, and silver and black or silver and blue. Rattle traps, just a brand name. You can buy a cheap knockoff. It's called a cotton cordell. That's like half the cost. What's the other one we like to fish?
Oh, gosh,
I think it's the Cream brand. CREME makes a version of that too that are less expensive but fish really well. And so what you would do when you see that, you see those fish all boiling up, you cast to the edge or the other edge of it, let your bait fish for 2-3 seconds and reel it pretty fast and you'll hook up. It's typically fish pushing the shad up to the surface. Sure, they're crowding them and trapping about up against something like a shoreline or rock wall. That's a sign that fish are eating right now, right there. Yeah. And then after that, when you stop catching them on your lipless crankbait, you might try a jig head with a piece of anchovy and cast in the same area and let it sink 20-30 feet. Because those fish are still looking around for injured fish. Sure. They could still be in the area, catch them on bait too. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Sure.
So the first one, just to reiterate, so if the fall is the best season, you would say, because the mixture of the fish.
Yeah, I love fall. Spring is really good too, don't get me wrong. The only challenge with spring is if it's a wet year, the water can be muddy and that can make fishing challenging. I like the fall too because people tend to not be out there. The funny thing is the greatest use is when the fishing's the worst. And people come out in the middle of summer when it's hot and they want to go out and catch trout. And it's like, well, you miss it, you know? It was during the spring or it's going to be during the fall. So, yeah, the fall is awesome. Yeah, when it gets cold, that water drips back down into the 60s and 50s and fish it until everything's hard and you keep fishing.
Okay, what's a good beginner lake you would recommend as well?
Was
A
that
good beginner lake, like, I know you said it's dependent upon.
they all fish really good if you're in town and you're familiar with the Duck Pond or Francis Short Pond.
Okay. Yeah, I live in town, but I'm not.
Yeah,
familiar with
so-
the ponds.
If you're downtown and you take Aztec Street, it runs north-south all the way till where it dead ends at that pond.
Okay.
It's over by Thorpe Park in the ball fields there.
Okay.
We stock rainbow trout into that and catfish and bluegill.
And it's called what again? I'm sorry.
It's called Francis Short.
Francis Short.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
thank you.
named after an educator that they worked at the school there, but. Yes,
So these 36 fisheries, are they all private or are they?
these are all public fisheries open to you all. Okay.
No, I mean, I guess who's raising fish, is that?
So the majority of those fish come from our game and fish hatchery system.
Okay. Or hatchery.
At least the trout do. We purchase fish from private vendors, but they're for the public. So things like catfish we get from Arkansas. The guy who raises them, his company name is Mr. Fish, and he comes out in a big flatbed truck, stocks catfish in. Same with bluegill. The good thing about those species is a lot of them will reproduce on their own once we get them in the lake. So things like bluegill and bass spawn in our lakes successfully. And so we get natural reproduction there where the trout can't. We don't have the lakes where the nice running inflow, cold enough water for the trout to spawn. So we have to continue.
So when you
Stop
say
those.
fisheries, more the body of water where you're catching.
Yeah, fishery is just a generic term for a body of water that we manage. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
With your experience, what's the best place to fish trout? I know you're from the White Mountains, so I know that's pretty good fishing.
So the answer is complicated because it depends on the time of year and the year. So as certain parts of the state get runoff and snow or don't, a lake that could be awesome last year may not be good at all this year. So Lower Lake Mary is a great example. If you fished it last year, it was fantastic. Now you drive by, it's just a meadow with a little puddle at the bottom. So it kind of depends. I grew up White Mountains, that was awesome fishing, and now they're having a bunch of water quality issues. So it just depends. That's where those resources like the fishing report will help you out, kind of guide you to what the fishing good. I can tell you locally right now, trout fishing's good at Asher's Lake, at Francis Short, and Dogtown Lake out in Williams. If you haven't been to Dogtown, it's an awesome little lake.
I've never been there.
But that could be different. Next year, those could all be dry and it could be somewhere else. That's the problem with northern Arizona.
Are there fish in Shoals Lake?
There are fish in shoals. We don't manage it, but there are some fish out there. It went almost totally dry a couple of years ago, and a lot of them died. I'm trying to think. Last survey we did, we caught crappie, yellow perch, I think bullhead catfish. Not a fan of bullheads. And I think a few largemouth bass. So, and then there's golden shiner and potato fish that get pretty big. Yeah. You can fish there, but we're not doing anything to manage it. We're not stocking fish. Not one of our fisheries.
Is there any good bass fishing around besides Old Pebble?
So locally, yes, we've actually been working for the last decade on doing some habitat projects to bolster our bass fishing locally. It'll never be as good as like Roosevelt because they have warmer water and those bass can grow faster. But we have pretty good bass in Kaibab, Dogtown, White Horse, in Cataract Lake, out in Williams. Our biggest one we caught in a survey, we caught a pushing 7-pound bass out of Dogtown. So some decent bass. We just don't have great big lakes and the warmth to grow them quite as big, but that's the idea is we're trying to provide fishing that's decent in the summer when the trout fishing is not good. So we're focusing on the species that are good, like bluegill and bass and catfish during the summer months. That's a good question.
Got a Zoom question here.
Yeah.
For local lakes in the Flagstaff region, how much of a concern is mercury or other?
That's a great question. Our regulations, I forgot. They list where we have warnings and limitations on the consumption of fish in terms of mercury. Most of the species, most of the places we're not terribly concerned about. We test mercury levels pretty often. We work with ADEQ, we send in fish samples, they test it. Things like our stock trout they don't really detect it at all because they are not in the lake long enough to accumulate mercury. So maybe let's take a step back. The reason that mercury is a problem is this concept of bioaccumulation. So mercury occurs in volcanic soils like Flagstaff naturally, and then it can also accumulate through pollution. So Mexico City's not too far south of us, and big wind gusts can move pollutants up into our water. It gets into our water in really low concentrations, not a concern. But then the smaller organisms in the water filter feed, and it's a little bit more in them, the little fish eat them. Those little fish have a slightly higher concentration of mercury, and then you get up the food chain to long-lived fish that eat only other fish, like walleye and pike. And that's where we start to see problems with mercury levels. And that's what the warnings are for, like Upper Lake Mary, there's a consumption advisory for northern pike and for walleye. And that's why they're long-lived top predatory fish. I will tell you that the levels we find in walleye and pike in Upper Lake Merritt are less than you're going to get in your can of tuna. So the standards for ADQ are way more stringent than the EPA for ocean fish. So mercury is really a concern for kids. It affects mental development, and for females thinking about having kids. Or I hate to say it, for an adult like me, I'm done developing mentally. I'm in my 40s. It's horrible to say, but it's not going to impact me. I'm not growing any new brain cells, right? That's where the concern is.
So it's, those warnings are in their regulations.
They are, yeah.
I know that's a PDF that people can get on, Game and Fish.
There is, and that's a link I totally spaced putting up there too, but, yeah, I didn't forget where in the regs, it's its own page.
Probably pull it up.
Yeah, I could probably.
That would be
You
awesome.
can find, so, the website.
But it's based on this color system, orange and red. Orange limits you to like 8 ounces of uncooked flesh in a month or 2 weeks. I forget the time frame, and then red is like a donut. And then if it's not one of those, green, then it's.
Are there actually trout in Upper Lake Mary?
So we don't manage Upper Lake Mary or trout, but on occasion, lower lake, yeah. But on occasion, the hatchery has to get rid of small trout. And we don't like to put them in our other lakes because it counts against our balance of how many trout we're allowed to stock each year. We have agreements with Fish and Wildlife Service on the number annually we're allowed to stock. And so we don't want to waste that on these. We maybe want to stock these for people to catch. And so on occasion, they'll dump a few into Upper Lake because it's a place that utilize them. We can grow some nice predatory fish, and we don't dump them on the ground. So it's like an accounting space issue at the hatchery. They account for a certain mortality with eggs in the fry, and when they're really good at their job.
So would someone click see details here and that would go to?
Yeah, I'll go to the reg and scroll down, keep scrolling. There you go, the 2025 6.
So yeah, it's a PDF, you can download.
Yeah, and then it's down the ways, I think. Search for it.
Mercury.
Let's see how good our website. There you go, that's like the first page. I think the lakes with the. It's like just a page or two down from that will be, there you go. That's that red, green, orange system, and where we have advisories, so Upper Lake Mary, walleye, they have to know consumption. Then northern pikes in orange, and that's limited to, there you go, 2 ounces per month of uncooked flesh weight. And they're really looking at children 12 years old and younger. So, like I said, it's really impacting kids. The interesting thing is it's like Val, I love eating stripers and it's in orange. Unfortunately, but
I myself eat much of those. Sorry, buddy.
yeah, in this region, Lake Mary, Lake Powell, and Santa Fe Reservoir, that was kind of a surprise that crappie showed up. And then Soldiers Annex, those are a couple of our lakes. Those are all in the region. The rest are elsewhere in the state.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So what would you fish for, Lake Mary?
And Upper Lake, oh, I still love catching walleye and pike. It's kind of a sleeper yellow bass fishery. They're not very many places in the state you can catch yellows, and our last survey, they were one of the most abundant species that we caught, which was a surprise. We've always only caught like a handful of them. We took up. So there's all kinds of different species of fish. There's crawdad in there, there's a few bass.
I guess when you were talking about the cost of fishing, isn't Upper Lake Mary, isn't there like a daily rate to actually get in to the lake or?
Yes, if you're gonna launch a boat or park in their parking lot.
So you can just walk in?
So if you want to shore fish, you don't have to pay that. You can park down by the dam or any other pull offs that are safe to pull off and walk in the lake and fish.
Okay.
I do it all the time. I'm not in jail yet, so.
And if you want to park, it's $40 for the year.
Yeah, they're pretty, and it's seasonal too, so they lift the cost of using that parking lot over the winter. Which is good because fishing's good in the spring and in the fall, right? So they're targeting the heavy recreational use of people water skiing. So if you fish those bookends, you don't just miss it. But it's still not terribly expensive.
Thank you for the great presentation.
Yeah, you bet. Any other questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to talk fishing all day long instead of getting the rest of my jobs. You guys.
Thank you.